seperti perempuan yang di pinggir sumur itu. Dia yang sudah memiliki 5 suami dan sekarang sedang tinggal dengan pasangan yang ke-6. Dosanya besar, begitu pula dosa kita. Tetapi firman Tuhan tadi mengingatkan kepada kita, kecaplah dan lihatlah betapa baiknya Tuhan. Dosa kita besar, tetapi rahmat-Nya lebih besar daripada dosa kita. Oleh karena itu gereja Tuhan, mari kita berdiri bersama. Kita sembah Dia, karena rahmat-Nya begitu limpah bagi kita.
Rahmat-Nya berlimpah, taklukkan gelap selalu baru. Dosa kita besar, rahmat-Nya lebih. Kasih yang tak ingat pelanggaran kita, walau Maha tahu tak dihitungnya, dibuang ke lautan dalam tak bertepi. Dosa
suaraku, ku memohon pengampunan. Jika kau hitung dosaku, ku tak layak menghadapmu. Pengampunanmu yang penuh oleh anugerah tebusku.
Dengan hormat kami mengundang Pastor Yosua Christian dari GPD Haleluya Surabaya untuk membawakan doa iluminasi.
Mari semua kita bersatu di dalam doa. Bapa, kami mengucap syukur untuk kasih karunia Tuhan, anugerah Tuhan yang berlimpah di dalam setiap kehidupan kami. Kau Allah yang selalu bersama-sama dengan kami, menyertai kami dalam setiap musim kehidupan kami Tuhan. Tuhan, kami mengucap syukur hari ini kami bisa berkumpul bersama-sama belajar Tuhan. Ini adalah kesempatan yang sangat berharga, kepercayaan yang berasal daripada Tuhan. Terima kasih Tuhan, terima kasih. Dan hari ini di plenary yang kedua ini kami membuka hati kami Tuhan. Bukakan mata telinga hati kami agar kami mampu mengerti apa yang kami pelajari pada saat pagi hari ini Tuhan. Terima kasih, biarlah apa yang kami dengar Tuhan dapat memperlengkapi kami pelayan-pelayan Tuhan untuk dapat melayani Tuhan lebih baik lagi Tuhan. Dan kami melakukan semuanya hanya untuk kemuliaan nama Tuhan, biar nama Tuhan saja yang dimuliakan. Terima kasih Tuhan Yesus, terima kasih. Kami siap untuk belajar di dalam nama Tuhan Yesus Kristus kami berdoa. Haleluya, amin.
Saudara-saudari silakan duduk. Kita akan memasuki plenary yang kedua dan kita akan dilayani oleh Jeremy Begbie yang memperoleh PhD-nya dari University of Aberdeen. Beliau adalah Profesor Thomas L. Langford di Duke Divinity School dan dia mengajar sistematika teologi dan menaruh minat pada hubungan antara teologi dan seni. Secara khusus, beliau mendalami hubungan antara musik dan teologi, dan beliau juga adalah seorang pendeta yang ditabiskan oleh gereja Inggris dan pemusik yang dilatih secara profesional. Jeremy Begbie akan membawakan plenary kedua dengan tema Injil dalam Ibadah Minggu. Mari bersama-sama kita simak Sing the Great Commission.
Yes, please be seated. Just like church, isn't it? Thank you so much, Keith, Chris, everybody who's involved with this. Always a delight and a privilege to be here. The other day I came across a website for chefs. Emblazoned on the homepage was their key message, and that is shape matters. Have we got that coming through? Because that's one, thank you very much. That's wonderful. Now, they're not telling you to watch your figure. They're saying if you're a chef, it really matters how you arrange the food on a plate. And they want to help you do just that. So I quote, the panna cotta ring, the mascarpone bar, the chocolate quenelle are ready to serve. All you have to do is shape them into a dessert with your signature. Shape matters. I've been asked to talk about the shape of worship and how it can serve the Great Commission. And I found that music has a lot to teach us here. For instance, if we take a melody that I think will be known here. Could we have that? Thank you very much. Now, if you actually look at the shape of this and circle the highest notes, and then the very highest note, which is the F sharp, you have a pattern. The melody is very carefully shaped, and that's why it's so effective. Worship comes in many shapes and sizes, but shape matters more than size. And here's one of the most common shapes. Beginning with adoration, you know this one well, and then some kind of confession and assurance, and proclamation, reading of the word, preaching of the word, and thanksgiving, supplication, some form of prayer, and then ascending, a commissioning. But whatever the shape, let's say straight away that if shape matters, two things really matter: order and flow. Clearly, Keith's song isn't going to make much sense if we mess around with the order. I doubt if that would sell anything, and Keith would, of course, be quite horrified. So why does preaching come before the Lord's Supper? Because it's only if we've heard the word of the gospel can we understand what's available at this meal. Why does confession come after adoration or after a sermon? Because only if we've heard from God and know who God is can we see our true need. Order matters. So be alert to the befores and the afters. Not only order, also flow matters. We've had fantastic examples of that already. Remarkable sequences of music. They weren't just thrown together on the back of an envelope last night. They were very carefully planned with regard to key and tempo and mood. But if we're constantly wrenching the musical gears, like many worship services, which sound like often someone driving a Shift 6 Star for the first time, what are we saying about the consistency and faithfulness of God? About how God treats us? If shape matters, order and flow matter. And that's why worship leaders need to learn from writers and storytellers and musicians, as Kristen's been saying. Because artists specialize in order and flow. It's what they do. Okay, now let's go a bit deeper. You may well say, shape matters. Yes, we all agree on that, but we want our worship to be, of course, gospel-shaped. Okay, it turns out there's a basic shape to the gospel story, and it's worth keeping this in mind, whatever kind of service you're preparing. How many were woken up this morning by an alarm clock or an alarm of some sort? You just have a show of hands there? Quite a few. Okay. The rest of you obviously naturally jump out of bed at 6 a.m. for an hour of prayer, but some of us need an alarm. So for those who need an alarm, there you were deep in sleep, and your iPhone, your clock or whatever bursts into life, and eventually you find it and you kill the sound. That's tension and resolution. One of the basic patterns of life, from nerves before the exam to the relief of the A grade, from traffic lights on red to lights on green, from angry words with your beloved to the hug in the kitchen. And it's basic to music too, or at least the music we know best in the West. We hear this, and we expect, want, desire that. It was said of Mozart, if he heard this, even if he was asleep, he would wake up, run all the way downstairs just to play that. This is the motor of Western music, from Albinoni to Adele. We're surrounded by music in this culture, and that means we're surrounded by tensions and resolutions. But there's something missing here, of course. After all, you were asleep before the alarm went off. Let's call that equilibrium. Your equilibrium was disturbed. Or perhaps the fuller picture, home, away, and home again. This is home, and you hear it twice. But then what? Oh, we're going away. We're back home again. Home, away, and home again. Every song we're singing at this conference, with almost, I think, no exception, carries this shape, whether at the macro or the micro level. I hope biblical bells are ringing now. Think of the equilibrium of the Garden of Eden, the catastrophic tension of Adam's rebellion, and the resolution starting with Abraham and climaxing in Jesus and reaching its grand finale in the new heaven and the new earth. That's a capital R and a capital H. The Bible doesn't end where it began. It ends with a cosmic makeover. A cosmic fixer-upper, I think they say in this country. Resolution with a capital R, home with a capital H, the new creation. This pattern also is the story of Israel in the Old Testament, from home to exile in Babylon and back. It is the story of the prodigal son, from home to the far country and then the homecoming. This by Charlie Mackesy. And of course, it's the story of Jesus, who comes from the Father, goes into a very far country for us, and by rising and ascending, he's welcomed home. This is the shape that underlies all Christian worship at its deepest level, and it's being played out, just think, in virtually everything we sing. There's a thought. This doesn't mean that every service of worship needs to be precisely in this threefold form. What it does mean is that somewhere, somehow, this gospel shape needs to be felt in the bones. Now, since there's a surplus of Church of England Anglican clergymen this afternoon, there are three of us, we might as well add another, less distinguished one, Rowan Williams. He writes, church is where the son's journey from the father's heart into death and hell and back again is lived out. Extraordinary words. But you could say that about worship. Worship is where the Son's journey from the Father's heart into death and hell and back again is lived out. So what does all this mean when it comes to shaping a worship service? I'd like to highlight just 3 things. First, it means no leapfrogging, jumping over the tensions to the resolution, pretending, in other words, that nothing's gone wrong. The danger here is sentimentality, one of the greatest dangers facing the church, I think, at present. When we airbrush out the agonies of the world around us, or airbrush out the agonies within a congregation, all that silent suffering. We pretend things are better than they are, or that we're better than we are. We see it when we avoid music that doesn't instantly push the feel-good button. The philosopher William James cynically once wrote about a visit to a Christian holiday resort. He spoke about the atrocious harmlessness of all things, the outside world with its heights and depths, the precipices and steep ideals, the gleams of the awful and the infinite. But not in the church, it seems. Very poignant. How did God come to heal the world? By meeting us at our lowest point. As W.B. Yeats, the poet, had it, these are words you might like to remember. Love has pitched his mansion in the place of excrement, for nothing can be soul or whole that has not been rent. God makes us whole, or as Malcolm's poem had it, renews us by plunging into a place of excrement where human beings are in the pit, or human beings are the pits. The cross is good news, of course it is, but only because here God deals with our worst selves, where we are furthest from God. Here we witness the awful and the infinite, the awfulness of our plight and the infinite resources of the love of God. If there's nothing in our worship that speaks of God descending into hell for us, we're probably worshiping an idol. Second, what else does it mean, this gospel's ape? It means learning to wait. So we hear this and we want that and expect it and get it eventually. But suppose, well, I can hold it up a bit. Shall I do it again? Yes or no? That's called deferred gratification. Basically, it's that. It makes you wait. In music, there are hundreds of examples of this. John Coltrane's Love Supreme comes to mind. And here's my favorite example. What's that called? Oh, amazing. This is the piece you played just before giving up the piano, all right? Well, when he goes away, he does this. It's Beethoven. He could just do this. And then everything would be symmetrical. But he doesn't. He adds an extra bar. And that's why you gave up the piano. Because it's a hard piece. The experience of delay is very common in the Bible. Remember Israel's cry, how long, O Lord? Why can't God act now? Remember Romans 8, creation groans, waiting for the liberty of the children of God. If we hope for what we do not see, says Paul, we wait for it with patience. This is the patience the first Christians had to learn. There's a wonderful book by a church historian called Alan Kreider called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. And he says how crucial patience was to the first Christians. The Roman Empire in which the church emerged, of course, was built on impatience. They forced everything, harassed, bullied. But not the church. The Christians cared for the downtrodden, the chronically sick, the disabled, the people you can't fix straight away. The early Christians' attitude to sex depended on waiting, not just getting what you want when you want it. They didn't try to force God's hand because God had been patient with them, so they could be patient with God. They knew how to wait. And worship helped them do just that. So how about a little bit more deferred gratification in our music, you songwriters? How about a little more silence in worship? That silence is not empty. It's full, it's pregnant. That's the metaphor of Romans 8, you remember? Because the notes just before it have made us expectant. Most of us are terrified of silence in worship because we think it means nothing's happening and someone's forgotten something or dropped something. But sometimes it may be just what we need because it can remind us we're not in charge. We're not in the driving seat. God is, and we can wait on him. If there's nothing in our worship that shows we're a people who've learned to wait, we're worshiping an idol. And lastly, what does this mean? It means, well, learning to improvise. In a few minutes, we're going to hear Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring by J.S. Bach. And Bach was a supreme improviser. And like a lot of his music, we're given in this piece a stable bass line, a reliable beat. Nothing very remarkable, and a very nice bass line. But then on top of that, a melody that goes all over the place. What happens next if you didn't know the piece? Very hard to predict. Bach is famous for this. He keeps writing things that are beautifully ordered, but if you stop the tape or press the pause button at any point, it's very hard to guess what's going to happen next. It's as if he's making it up as he goes along. He was a very, very great improviser. Please remember, most of his music started through improvisation. Many of us live our lives as if there were only two. Oh, there he is, that's right. That's why jazz musicians like Bach so much, because they have a great deal in common. Many of us live our lives as if there were only two possible shapes to our lives: order and disorder. Order is good, disorder is evil. If our house is tidy, we get complimented. If it looks like a scrap heap, we apologize to visitors. I'm so sorry. No, go. Order and destructive disorder. But are these the only two options? What about laughter? You wouldn't call it ordered. Unpredictable, yes, but it's not harmful. Quite the opposite, it's actually quite good for you. It's what a friend of mine calls non-order, or the jazz factor. In worship, we often think order and disorder are the only two options. Traditionalists crave predictable order because they think the only other option is destructive disorder. So you find crusty music directors who see their life calling as squeezing all the surprise out of worship, terrified of anything that can't be rehearsed. On the other side, the anti-liturgical revolutionaries, resisting anything like a prearranged order, every week inventing ever more exotic services, fizzing with supposedly spirit-anointed spontaneity. And as we all know, very often the long-term result is worship far more rigid than anything it was designed to replace. But for Bach and for all jazz musicians, you're really free, you really soar when you have order and non-order together. Or to put it in gospel terms, when you have the steady, unalterable rhythm of what God has done in Jesus. And the unplanned things of the Spirit who weaves things out of that base. The spontaneous prayer, the unrehearsed congregational song, the sudden ecstatic amen from the pews. Yes, the interruption, the embarrassing interruption from the child. The surprising riff in a sermon that speaks to this congregation right here, right now. If there's nothing in our worship that tells us God can be both faithful and surprise us, we're probably worshiping an idol. So here again, Jesu joy of man's desiring. Above all, here the joy of someone who's learned to improvise. Thank you.